In the vast darkness of space, there exists a truth that most species learn too late: never assume you're the apex predator. The Zephyrian hunting pack had dominated 3 star systems, their bioluminescent scales and razor-sharp claws making them legends among the galaxy's most feared predators. They had never failed to claim their prey. Until they encountered Dr. Sarah Chen. What began as a routine hunt on the remote mining colony of Kepler 442b would become the most terrifying lesson in human evolution that the galaxy had ever witnessed. Because while the Zephyrians were perfect hunters, humans had spent millions of years becoming something far more dangerous: survivors who refused to become prey. The hunt was supposed to last 6 hours. It lasted 6 days. And, when it was over, the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. This is the story of how one woman reminded the universe why Earth's children carry the genes of apex predators in their veins, and why even the most dangerous aliens should fear the species that once stared down saber-toothed tigers and declared, "Not today." The morning air on Kepler 442b carried the metallic taste of iron-rich dust and the faint ozone smell that preceded the planet's brief electrical storms. Dr. Sarah Chen adjusted her field gear one final time before stepping out of the research station's airlock. The mining colony stretched before her like a mechanical scar across the alien landscape, its extraction towers piercing the orange-tinted sky like metallic fingers. Sarah had been on Kepler 442b for 3 months, studying the unique geological formations that made this world so valuable to the Terran Mining Consortium. The planet's crust contained rare earth elements in concentrations that defied conventional planetary formation theories. Her job was to determine why, and, more importantly, where to find more deposits. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent years working alone in hostile environments. At 34, Sarah had already survived fieldwork on 17 different worlds, from the ice caves of Europa to the acid rainforests of Proxima Centauri C. Her colleagues often joked that she was more comfortable in an environmental suit than normal clothes, and they weren't entirely wrong. The communication device on her belt crackled to life as she walked toward the geological survey site 3 kilometers from the main colony. "Chen here," she said, activating the transmitter with a practiced motion. "Sarah, this is Control. We've got some unusual readings on the perimeter sensors. Might be another one of those solar flare effects, but we wanted you to know in case your equipment starts acting up." The voice belonged to Marcus Webb, the colony's operations director. "Thanks for the heads up, Marcus. I'm about 2 hours out from Site 7. If my gear starts throwing phantom readings, I'll know why." Sarah paused to check her portable scanner, watching the steady pulse of the energy readings she'd been tracking for weeks. "Have you heard anything from the supply ship? We're running low on power cells for the deep core samplers. The meridian is still 3 days out. Think you can make your current cells last?" Sarah did quick mental calculations. If she was careful and didn't run any unnecessary deep scans, she might be able to stretch her power supply. "Should be fine. I'll just have to be more selective about which samples I analyze on-site versus bringing back to the lab." "Copy that. Stay safe out there, Chen. Control out." The transmission ended with a soft click, leaving Sarah alone with the rhythmic sound of her boots crunching on the planet's crystalline sand. The geological formations on Kepler 442b were unlike anything in the standard planetary databases. The rock structures seemed to follow patterns that suggested some kind of underlying organization, as if the planet itself had been designed rather than formed through natural processes. Sarah had been following a particular energy signature for weeks, a deep subsurface anomaly that her instruments could detect but not fully analyze. Today's expedition was intended to bring her close enough to take direct readings with her most sensitive equipment. The readings had been growing stronger as she'd mapped the area, suggesting she was approaching the source of whatever was creating the unusual energy patterns. The landscape around her was eerily beautiful in its alien geometry. Crystalline formations jutted from the ground at precise angles, creating natural arches and towers that caught and refracted the system's binary starlight into spectacular displays of color. The effect was mesmerizing, but Sarah had learned long ago not to let alien beauty distract her from potential dangers. She reached the first waypoint marker she'd planted during her previous expedition and checked her navigation system. The energy readings were definitely stronger here, pulsing in a rhythm that almost seemed organic. Sarah frowned at her scanner's display. The pattern was too regular to be natural geological activity, but too complex to be from any known technological source. As she crested a low ridge, Sarah got her first clear view of the area where the energy signature was strongest. A circular depression in the ground stretched before her, approximately 50 meters across and lined with the same crystalline formations she'd observed throughout the region. But these crystals were different. They pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light that corresponded exactly to the energy readings on her scanner. Sarah felt the familiar thrill of discovery that had driven her through years of academic study and field research. This was why she did this work, why she spent months at a time on remote worlds gathering data that would advance human understanding of the universe. Every major breakthrough started with moments like this, when a researcher encountered something that challenged everything they thought they knew. She began her descent into the circular formation, carefully documenting every step with her recording equipment. The energy readings grew stronger with each meter, and she noticed that the atmospheric composition was subtly different within the formation. Higher concentrations of noble gases, particularly xenon and krypton, in patterns that suggested some kind of technological process. Sarah was so focused on her readings that she almost missed the first sign that something was wrong. A shadow passed overhead too quickly to be a cloud, and when she looked up, the sky was empty. Her training kicked in immediately, and she activated her suit's passive scanning mode, which would detect any approaching objects without transmitting signals that might reveal her position. The scanner showed nothing, but Sarah's instincts were screaming warnings. 20 years of fieldwork had taught her to trust those instincts, even when her instruments contradicted them. She began moving toward the nearest cover, a cluster of tall crystalline formations that would provide concealment while she assessed the situation. The attack came without warning. Something massive struck the ground where she had been standing moments before, sending crystalline fragments flying in all directions. Sarah caught a glimpse of scaled hide and predatory eyes before her combat training took over completely. She rolled behind the crystal formation and activated her suit's emergency protocols. Automated distress signals began transmitting to the colony while her suit's defensive systems came online. The impact crater where the creature had landed was easily 3 meters across, suggesting something far larger and more powerful than any of the local wildlife in the colony's databases. Sarah's breathing was controlled but rapid as she processed what she'd seen in that brief glimpse. Bipedal, approximately 4 meters tall, covered in scales that seemed to shift color to match the surrounding environment. The creature had moved with predatory precision, suggesting intelligence and planning rather than animal instinct. Another impact shook the ground nearby, and Sarah realized there was more than one of them. Her suit's sensors were detecting movement patterns consistent with coordinated hunting behavior. Whatever these creatures were, they were working together to corner her. The smart tactical choice would be to stay hidden and wait for rescue. Sarah's distress signal would bring a security team from the colony within an hour, and her suit had enough power and life support to last much longer than that. But, as she watched the creatures systematically destroying her scanning equipment and blocking potential escape routes, Sarah realized they weren't planning to give her an hour. One of the creatures appeared at the edge of her cover, moving with liquid grace despite its massive size. Sarah got her first clear look at her pursuers, and what she saw made her blood run cold. These weren't simple predators driven by hunger or territorial instinct. The creature's eyes showed intelligence and purpose. It was studying her, evaluating her capabilities and planning its next move. Sarah's mind raced through her options. Her suit had basic defensive capabilities, enough to handle most environmental hazards and simple wildlife, but nothing designed to fight off intelligent predators of this size and apparent sophistication. Her emergency beacon was transmitting, but even if the colony responded immediately, help was still at least 40 minutes away. The creature moved closer, and Sarah could see details that confirmed her worst fears. Retractable claws designed for precise cutting rather than simple slashing. Articulated hands capable of tool use. Most telling of all, the creature wore what appeared to be technological devices integrated into its natural armor. These weren't native wildlife. They were hunters from somewhere else, and they had come to Kepler 442b for a specific purpose. Given the timing and their apparent focus on her, Sarah was beginning to suspect that she was that purpose. The creature made a sound that was part growl and part something else entirely. A moment later, Sarah heard answering calls from multiple directions. They were communicating, coordinating their movements. She counted at least 4 distinct voices, possibly more. Sarah checked her suit's power levels and weapon systems. The defensive laser had enough charge for perhaps a dozen shots, and her emergency flares might provide temporary distraction. Against multiple intelligent hunters of this size, her chances in a direct confrontation were essentially zero. But Sarah Chin hadn't survived fieldwork on 17 worlds by accepting impossible odds. She'd survived by being smarter, more adaptable, and more determined than anything that wanted to kill her. These creatures might be perfect hunters in their natural environment, but they had made one critical mistake. They had chosen to hunt a human who had no intention of becoming prey. Sarah began moving deeper into the crystalline formations, using the complex geometry to break line of sight while she formulated a plan. The creatures were coordinated and intelligent, but they were operating in an environment they didn't fully understand. The energy patterns that had brought her here in the first place might provide opportunities that her pursuers couldn't anticipate. She activated her suit's analysis systems and began scanning the crystalline structures around her. The energy readings were off the charts this close to the source, and she was beginning to understand the true nature of what she'd discovered. These formations weren't just geological anomalies. They were part of a vast technological network, dormant but still functional after unknown ages. Sarah smiled grimly as she studied the energy patterns. These hunters had chosen their battlefield poorly. They thought they were facing a helpless scientist armed with nothing but scanning equipment and basic survival gear. They were about to learn that humans had spent millions of years evolving into something far more dangerous than prey. And Dr. Sarah Chen was about to remind them why Earth's children carried the genes of survivors who had faced down everything the universe could throw at them and refused to quit. The hunt was about to begin in earnest. But these alien predators were about to discover that sometimes the prey hunts back. The first hunter died because it underestimated human ingenuity. Sarah had spent the past 20 minutes moving through the crystalline formations, carefully studying the energy patterns while staying ahead of her pursuers. The creatures were methodical in their search, using coordinated sweeps that suggested military-style training. But they made one critical error: they assumed their prey would continue running. Instead, Sarah had used their methodical approach against them. While they searched the outer areas of the formation, she'd worked her way back to the central depression where the energy readings were strongest. Her analysis of the crystalline structures had revealed something extraordinary: they weren't just conducting energy, they were storing it, like a massive battery system that had been accumulating power for millennia. The lead hunter appeared at the edge of the central depression just as Sarah finished her preparations. It moved with the confidence of a predator that had never encountered meaningful resistance, its scaled hide shifting through colors that helped it blend with the surrounding crystals. The creature's technological augmentations were more visible now: neural interface ports behind its skull, targeting sensors integrated into its eyes, and what appeared to be personal shielding systems built into its armor. Sarah waited until the creature was halfway down the slope before she triggered the energy discharge. Her portable scanner, modified with components from her deep core sampling equipment, sent a precisely tuned pulse into the crystalline matrix. The stored energy responded instantly, creating a cascade effect that traveled through the entire formation in milliseconds. The hunter was caught directly in the path of the discharge, its technological systems overloading in spectacular fashion. The creature's death wasn't quick or clean. The energy surge fried its neural implants first, causing massive seizures as its augmented nervous system failed. Its shielding systems exploded outward in crackling arcs of electricity while its targeting sensors literally melted from the feedback. The hunter collapsed, its massive body convulsing as electrical energy continued to arc across its scales. Sarah felt a moment of visceral satisfaction as she watched the creature die. Fear was still coursing through her system, but it was now mixed with something else: the cold fury that humans developed when pushed beyond their breaking point. These hunters had come here to kill her, probably for sport or some twisted sense of challenge. They were about to learn that humans didn't make good victims. The other hunters arrived within seconds, their calls now carrying notes of alarm and rage. Sarah caught glimpses of them as they surrounded the central depression, their postures radiating aggression. She could see at least 3 more, possibly 4, moving with increased caution now that they knew their prey could fight back. But Sarah wasn't finished with her surprises. The energy discharge had done more than kill one hunter, it had activated systems that had been dormant for countless ages. The crystalline formations around the depression were now glowing with steady light, and Sarah's scanner was detecting massive energy buildups throughout the entire area. She'd stumbled onto something that went far beyond geological anomalies. This was technology, ancient and sophisticated beyond anything in the current galactic databases. And, if her readings were correct, she'd just awakened a system that spanned the entire continent. One of the hunters began its descent toward her position, moving with the deadly grace of a perfect predator. Sarah could see the intelligence in its eyes, the careful calculation as it evaluated threats and planned its approach. This creature was learning from its companion's death, adapting its tactics to account for unexpected resistance. Sarah activated her suit's emergency flares, filling the air with burning magnesium that would interfere with the hunter's technological sensors. In the brief chaos of light and smoke, she moved to a new position, using her knowledge of the crystalline formation structure to stay hidden while she planned her next move. The hunter's frustrated roar echoed across the landscape, followed by rapid communication with its companions. They were coordinating again, probably developing new strategies to deal with prey that refused to behave as expected. Sarah could hear movement from multiple directions as they repositioned themselves to cut off her escape routes. But Sarah had no intention of escaping. Not yet. The energy patterns she was detecting suggested that this ancient system was still building toward something, responding to her initial activation with increasing power levels. If she could maintain her position long enough, she might have access to capabilities that would turn this hunt into something very different. The second hunter died because it tried to outthink a human engineer. Sarah had noticed that the creature's technological augmentations were giving them detailed information about their environment, probably including energy signatures and structural analysis. But those same systems could be exploited if someone understood how they worked. And Sarah had spent her career studying technological interfaces with natural systems. She'd modified her scanner to broadcast false energy signatures, creating phantom readings that would confuse the hunter's sensors. When the second hunter approached what it thought was her hiding position, it instead found a cluster of her emergency power cells wired to detonate simultaneously. The explosion wasn't large enough to kill the creature directly, but it didn't need to be. The hunter's personal shielding systems, already strained from protecting against the ambient energy discharges in the area, failed catastrophically when hit by the concentrated blast. Without its shields, the creature was vulnerable to the increasing energy levels that were building throughout the crystalline formation. Sarah watched from her actual position as the hunter's augmented systems began failing one by one. Its targeting sensors sparked and went dark, followed by its communication implants and, finally, its neural interfaces. The creature staggered blindly for several seconds before collapsing, its nervous system overwhelmed by feedback from its failing technology. 2 down, at least 3 to go. But Sarah could hear the remaining hunters changing their tactics again. Their communication calls were different now, carrying notes of caution and something that might have been respect. They were beginning to understand that their prey was more dangerous than they had anticipated. Sarah checked her suit's power levels and found them lower than she'd hoped. The modifications to her scanner had drained more energy than expected, and she was down to perhaps 30 minutes of full system operation. If this hunt lasted much longer, she'd have to start making hard choices about which systems to keep running. But the ancient technology around her was still building power, and Sarah was beginning to understand its purpose. The crystalline formations weren't just energy storage, they were part of a planetary defense network, designed to respond to threats with overwhelming force. Her initial activation had awakened systems that spanned continents, and they were still coming online. The third hunter approached with extreme caution, its movements suggesting a level of tactical sophistication that made Sarah's blood run cold. This creature had learned from the deaths of its companions and was applying that knowledge systematically. It stayed outside the energy discharge zones, used cover effectively, and approached from unexpected angles. Sarah realized she was facing a hunter that matched her own intelligence and adaptability. The creature was no longer underestimating her capabilities, which meant she could no longer rely on surprise and misdirection. This would come down to a direct confrontation between predator and prey, with both sides fully aware of the stakes. The hunter made its move with lightning speed, crossing the distance between its cover and Sarah's position in a matter of seconds. Sarah barely had time to activate her suit's defensive laser before the creature was on her, its claws raking across her armor in sparks of superheated metal. Sarah rolled away from the attack, firing her laser in controlled bursts that forced the hunter to activate its personal shields. The energy barriers flickered to life around the creature's body, deflecting her shots but consuming power with each impact. Sarah could see the strain on the hunter's systems as it tried to maintain its defenses while pressing its attack. But the creature was faster and stronger than any human, with natural weapons that could tear through her armor given time. Sarah's suit was already showing damage warnings from the initial attack, and she knew she couldn't survive many more direct confrontations. That's when the ancient defense network fully activated. Energy erupted from every crystalline formation in the area, creating a web of crackling electricity that turned the landscape into a maze of deadly barriers. The hunter's shields overloaded instantly, leaving it vulnerable to the massive energy discharges that were now arcing across the entire depression. Sarah's suit protected her from the worst of the electrical storm, its insulation systems holding steady even as lightning-like discharges filled the air around her. But the hunter had no such protection. Its technological augmentations, designed to give it advantages over natural prey, became liabilities in an environment saturated with chaotic energy. The creature's death was swift and violent. Electrical discharges coursed through its body, following the pathways of its neural implants and frying its nervous system from within. It collapsed without a sound, smoke rising from its technological components as they burned out completely. 3 down. But Sarah could still hear at least 2 more hunters in the area, and they were no longer approaching. Their communication calls had changed again, now carrying notes of alarm and what sounded like tactical reassessment. They were learning, adapting, and probably calling for reinforcements. Sarah used the momentary pause to assess her situation. Her suit's power was down to 20 minutes, the defense network was still building energy toward some unknown threshold, and she had no idea how many more hunters might be coming. But she was alive, she was fighting back, and she was starting to understand the true nature of what she discovered. This planet wasn't just a mining colony. It was the site of an ancient civilization that had built defenses capable of protecting themselves against any threat. And Sarah Chen, through a combination of scientific knowledge, human stubbornness, and sheer survival instinct, had awakened those defenses and turned them against her pursuers. The remaining hunters were about to learn a hard lesson about the dangers of hunting humans. Because while they might be perfect predators in their natural environment, they were facing prey that had evolved on a world where everything wanted to kill you, and humans had not only survived but thrived. Sarah checked her suit's remaining power and smiled grimly. She had enough energy left for one final gambit, something that would either end this hunt permanently or get her killed in the attempt. But that was exactly the kind of impossible choice that humans had been making for millions of years. The hunt was far from over, but the balance had shifted. The predators were about to become the prey. The 4th hunter died because it made the mistake of thinking like a predator when it should have been thinking like prey. Sarah had spent the brief lull in the attack studying the energy patterns emanating from the ancient defense network. The system was responding to her biometric signatures, somehow recognizing her as a legitimate user despite the millennia that had passed since its creators vanished. Every time she interfaced with her scanner, the network's responses grew more sophisticated and targeted. She discovered that the crystalline formations weren't just passive energy storage devices. They were nodes in a vast computational matrix that could analyze threats and deploy countermeasures with frightening precision. The defense network had been learning from each encounter with the hunters, adapting its responses based on their technological signatures and behavioral patterns. The 4th hunter approached from above, using some kind of personal flight system to bypass the energy barriers that now crisscrossed the ground level. It was a sound tactical decision that demonstrated the creature's intelligence and adaptability. But it also revealed the hunter's fundamental misunderstanding of what it was facing. The ancient defense network had been designed to protect against threats that could attack from any direction, including aerial assault. When the hunter activated its flight systems, it became visible to sensors that had been tracking orbital bombardments when humanity's ancestors were still learning to control fire. Sarah watched through her suit's enhanced optics as the network's response unfolded. Energy discharges erupted from crystalline formations across the landscape, creating a three-dimensional web of electrical barriers that turned the sky into a death trap. The hunter's flight systems failed instantly, sending it plummeting toward the ground with smoke trailing from its technological components. But the creature was tough and experienced. It survived the crash and immediately began moving towards Sarah's position, adapting once again to unexpected resistance. Its augmented vision was scanning for her heat signature while its claws extended in preparation for close combat. Sarah had been expecting this. Instead of hiding or running, she moved toward the hunter, using her suit's remaining power to charge directly through one of the energy barriers. The discharge that would have killed an unprotected human merely drained her suit's power reserves while temporarily overloading her pursuer's sensors. The hunter's confusion lasted only seconds, but it was enough. Sarah's suit was equipped with industrial cutting tools designed for geological sampling, and she put them to lethal use. The plasma cutter that normally sliced through rock formations made quick work of the hunter's neck, severing its spinal column before it could react. 4 down. But, as Sarah stood over the creature's corpse, she realized the nature of her situation had changed completely. These weren't random predators hunting for food or territory. They were professionals, and they'd been sent here for a specific purpose. Which meant there would be more coming. Her suit's power was nearly depleted, but the ancient defense network was now fully operational and responding to her presence as if she were one of its original operators. Sarah found herself with access to technologies that humanity had never dreamed of, weapons and defenses that made her personal equipment look like stone tools by comparison. But understanding how to use this technology was another matter entirely. The network's interface systems were completely alien, operating on principles that challenged everything Sarah understood about physics and engineering. She was trying to control systems designed by minds that thought in ways fundamentally different from human cognition. The remaining hunters had withdrawn to a safe distance, but Sarah could detect their communication signals growing stronger. They were calling for backup, probably requesting specialists equipped to deal with unexpected resistance. Sarah estimated she had perhaps an hour before reinforcements arrived, and she intended to use that time to understand the ancient technology surrounding her. Her scanner, now operating on backup power, revealed the true scope of what she'd awakened. The defense network extended across the entire continent, incorporating millions of crystalline nodes that could generate, store, and direct energy on a scale that boggled the mind. This wasn't just planetary defense. It was a weapon system capable of protecting entire star systems from invasion. Sarah began moving through the network's interface systems, guided by intuition and her engineer's understanding of logical system architecture. The alien designers had built redundancy and adaptability into every component, allowing the network to function even after eons of dormancy. It was beginning to recognize her intentions and providing increasingly sophisticated assistance. The first reinforcement wave arrived sooner than expected. Sarah's enhanced sensors detected the incoming ships while they were still in high orbit, their approach vectors indicating a coordinated assault by what appeared to be a full hunting pack. These weren't the individual predators she'd been facing. This was a military-style operation with multiple specialized units and advanced technological support. But they were approaching a planet that now had active defenses controlled by someone who had spent her career studying how to make hostile environments work in her favor. Sarah interfaced with the defense network's targeting systems and felt a moment of vertigo as she realized the scope of the power at her disposal. The network could track individual ships across interplanetary distances and engage them with energy weapons that made human military technology look primitive. But, more importantly, it could learn from each engagement, adapting its responses to counter new threats and tactical approaches. Sarah triggered the network's automated defense protocols and watched through orbital sensors as the incoming ships encountered resistance they hadn't expected. Energy beams lanced out from hidden installations across the planet's surface, striking the hunter vessels with surgical precision. Several ships were destroyed outright, while others suffered critical damage that sent them spiraling toward the surface. But some of the hunters survived the initial barrage, and their ships were equipped with sophisticated countermeasures. They scattered across the system, using hit-and-run tactics to probe the defense network's capabilities while looking for weaknesses they could exploit. Sarah found herself fighting a battle across multiple theaters simultaneously. The network's interface systems allowed her to coordinate defensive responses on a planetary scale while tracking individual threats and allocating resources to counter them. It was like playing a three-dimensional chess game where the stakes were her survival and the pieces were weapons that could crack moons. The hunters were good. Their tactics were sophisticated, their technology was advanced, and they adapted quickly to new threats. But they were facing a defense system that had been designed by a species that understood warfare on a galactic scale, operated by a human who refused to accept defeat regardless of the odds. One by one, Sarah tracked down the surviving hunter vessels and eliminated them. Some tried to land ground troops, only to find the surface crawling with automated defenses that could identify and engage threats before they cleared their landing craft. Others attempted orbital bombardment, but the network's energy shields could absorb and redirect incoming fire with terrifying efficiency. The last hunter ship tried to escape, probably intending to report back to its superiors about the unexpected resistance it had encountered. Sarah couldn't allow that to happen. She pushed the defense network to its maximum range and destroyed the fleeing vessel just as it reached the edge of the star system. Silence fell across the planet as the immediate threats were eliminated. But Sarah knew this was only a temporary victory. The hunters had been operating as part of a larger organization, and their failure to return would eventually draw more attention. She needed to understand what she was dealing with and prepare for whatever came next. Using the network's vast database systems, Sarah began analyzing the technological signatures and communication logs from the destroyed hunter vessels. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The hunters weren't just random predators or even professional killers. They were scouts for something much larger and more dangerous. The data revealed references to the Great Hunt, a galaxy-spanning organization that specialized in tracking down and eliminating species that showed potential to become threats to the established galactic order. Humanity had apparently caught their attention through its rapid expansion and technological development, and the hunters had been sent to evaluate and eliminate key individuals who might contribute to human advancement. Sarah realized she hadn't been targeted randomly. Her research into planetary formation and energy systems had identified her as someone whose discoveries might accelerate human technological development. The hunters had come to eliminate her specifically, probably along with other scientists and engineers across human space. But they had made a critical error in their intelligence gathering. They hadn't realized that sending hunters to a world with active ancient defenses would awaken those systems and put devastating military technology into human hands. Sarah now controlled weapons and defensive systems that could protect not just herself, but potentially all of human civilization. The network's database contained detailed information about the civilization that had built it, a species called the Architects who had disappeared from the galaxy millions of years ago. They had faced a similar threat from an ancient version of the Hunter organization, and they had built these defense networks to protect younger species from extermination. Sarah felt a profound sense of responsibility as she realized what had happened. The Architects had left their technology behind specifically to help species like humanity survive the transition from planetary to galactic civilization. They had foreseen the threat that organizations like the Great Hunt would pose to developing species, and they had prepared countermeasures. But the defense network required an operator, someone with the intelligence and determination to use its capabilities effectively. The Architects had built the system to respond to beings who demonstrated the qualities necessary for galactic survival: adaptability, resilience, and the absolute refusal to surrender in the face of impossible odds. Sarah Chen, through her actions during the hunt, had proven herself worthy of that trust. As she stood in the center of the ancient technology, feeling the vast power of the defense network responding to her will, Sarah made a decision that would change the course of human history. The Great Hunt had made the mistake of targeting her species, and she now had the tools to make them regret that choice. The hunters had come to eliminate a threat to their established order. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous, a human who now controlled weapons that could reshape the balance of power across the entire galaxy. The hunt was about to become a war. And humanity had just gained its first strategic advantage in a conflict that would determine whether Earth's children would survive to take their place among the stars, or be exterminated by predators who saw them as nothing more than dangerous prey. Sarah began planning her counterattack, guided by ancient technology and driven by the same stubborn refusal to quit that had carried humanity from the caves of Africa to the stars of distant worlds. The Great Hunt was about to learn why humans had never stayed prey for long. The message that Sarah Chen broadcast across 17 star systems was simple, direct, and absolutely terrifying to those who understood its implications. This is Dr. Sarah Chen of the Terran Research Consortium, speaking from Kepler 442b. I am in control of an active architect defense network. The Great Hunt's operations against humanity have been detected and logged. You have 72 hours to withdraw all assets from human space and provide guarantees of non-interference with human civilization. Failure to comply will result in the activation of defensive protocols across multiple star systems. You were warned. Sarah transmitted the message using the ancient network's communication systems, which could punch signals through subspace with an efficiency that made human faster-than-light communication look primitive. Every major power in the known galaxy would receive her ultimatum simultaneously, along with detailed scans proving that she controlled technology far beyond current galactic standards. The response was swift and predictable. The Great Hunt's regional commander, a being calling itself Apex Destroyer Esakatar, replied within 6 hours with a message dripping with contempt and threats. The alien's words were translated through the network's universal communication protocols, but the meaning was clear enough: humanity would be exterminated for daring to interfere with the established galactic order. Sarah's response was to demonstrate exactly why that was a very bad idea. The Great Hunt maintained a staging area in the Proxima Centauri system, using the outer planets as a base for operations against human colonies in the region. Intelligence gathered from the captured hunter ships revealed the location's coordinates and defensive capabilities. Sarah studied the data for 12 hours, learning everything she could about the enemy's tactical preferences and technological limitations. Then, she reached out across 4 light-years of space and deleted the entire facility from existence. The Architect Defense Network's strategic weapons operated on principles that human science couldn't even begin to understand. They didn't fire projectiles or energy beams in any conventional sense. Instead, they manipulated fundamental forces at the quantum level, creating localized distortions in spacetime that could tear apart molecular bonds across interstellar distances. The Great Hunt's staging area simply ceased to exist. Ships, stations, personnel, and equipment were reduced to their component atoms in a process so swift and complete that no distress signals had time to transmit. One moment there was a military installation capable of threatening multiple human worlds. The next moment there was empty space and a slowly expanding cloud of particles. The psychological impact of the demonstration rippled across the galaxy within days. The Great Hunt had operated for millennia with complete impunity, secure in their technological superiority and the fear they inspired in younger species. The sudden loss of an entire regional command structure to a previously unknown weapon system created panic in their ranks and confusion among their allies. But Sarah was just getting started. Using the network's vast database of galactic intelligence, she began identifying Great Hunt assets throughout human space and beyond. The organization's secrecy, once their greatest strength, now worked against them. They had hidden their operations so well that their own allies didn't know the full extent of their activities, making it impossible to coordinate an effective defense when those assets began disappearing. Sarah's campaign was methodical and utterly ruthless. She targeted communications nodes first, cutting off the hunters' ability to coordinate their scattered forces. Supply depots followed, eliminating their logistical support and stranding hunter teams across dozens of worlds. Finally, she began hunting the hunters themselves, using the network's sensors to track down individual operators and eliminate them with surgical precision. Each strike was calibrated for maximum psychological impact. Sarah wasn't just destroying great hunt assets, she was demonstrating that their greatest hunters were helpless against technology they couldn't understand or counter. Predators who had never known fear were learning what it meant to be prey. The broader galactic community watched in fascination and terror as humanity's unknown protectors systematically dismantled one of the galaxy's most feared organizations. Some species began reaching out through diplomatic channels, seeking to establish contact with whoever controlled such devastating technology. Others retreated into isolation, unwilling to risk attracting attention from a power that could erase star systems. But the Great Hunt's leadership wasn't ready to surrender. If they couldn't defeat humanity's defender through conventional means, they would escalate to weapons and tactics that might level the playing field. And they had allies who possessed technology that could challenge even architect defensive systems. The first sign of escalation came when Sarah's sensors detected massive energy signatures approaching the galactic core. Ships were emerging from hidden installations that hadn't been active for millions of years, carrying weapons that radiated power signatures unlike anything in the current galactic databases. Sarah realized with growing alarm that the Great Hunt wasn't operating alone. They were part of an older organization, one that had fought the architects directly during their golden age. The hunters she'd been destroying were merely the most visible part of a conspiracy that reached back through geological ages. The ancient enemies of the architects were awakening, and they were bringing technology that had been designed specifically to counter architect defensive systems. Sarah found herself facing opponents who understood the network's capabilities as well as she did, and who possessed weapons that could exploit weaknesses she didn't even know existed. The first direct assault on her position came from a ship that materialized in Kepler 442b's upper atmosphere without triggering any of the network's sensors. It used some kind of cloaking technology that operated outside normal spacetime, making it invisible to detection systems that could track objects across galactic distances. Sarah barely had time to raise the planetary shields before the ship opened fire with weapons that punched through architect defenses like they were paper. Energy beams designed to counter the network's protective systems carved through her barriers and struck the surface with devastating effect. But Sarah had learned from her encounters with the hunters. She didn't try to match the enemy's overwhelming firepower. Instead, she used the network's adaptability against them, analyzing their weapon signatures and developing countermeasures in real time. The architect systems had been built to evolve in response to new threats, incorporating lessons learned from each engagement to improve their defensive capabilities. Within minutes of the initial attack, Sarah's shields were adapting to the enemy's weapons, deflecting and absorbing energy that had previously cut through them effortlessly. The attacking ship found itself facing defenses that grew stronger with each shot fired. Its weapons, designed to exploit specific weaknesses in architect technology, became useless as the network evolved beyond their parameters. When Sarah finally counterattacked, her response was swift and decisive. The enemy ship exploded in a burst of exotic radiation that would have been visible from neighboring star systems. But, even as she celebrated the victory, Sarah knew it was only the beginning. The ancient enemies of the architects were awakening across the galaxy, and they would bring everything they had learned from eons of conflict to bear against her. Sarah began preparing for a war that would span multiple star systems and involve weapons that could threaten entire civilizations. The network's manufacturing systems came online, building defensive installations and automated weapons platforms on a scale that dwarfed anything humanity had ever attempted. But she wasn't fighting alone anymore. Sarah's demonstration of architect technology had convinced several species to openly ally with humanity, providing intelligence and resources that helped her understand the scope of what she was facing. The galaxy was choosing sides in a conflict that would determine whether younger species would be allowed to develop freely or be exterminated by ancient powers that saw them as threats to the established order. Sarah stood at the center of the ancient network, feeling the weight of responsibility for not just human survival, but the future of galactic civilization itself. The Great Hunt had made the mistake of targeting her species, and, in doing so, they had awakened forces that had been dormant for millions of years. The hunters who had come to eliminate a single human scientist had instead triggered a war that would reshape the galaxy. And, at the center of that conflict was Dr. Sarah Chen, a geologist who had refused to become prey and now commanded weapons that could determine the fate of entire star systems. The ancient enemies of the architects were about to learn the same lesson that the hunters had discovered too late: humans don't stay prey for long. And, when they fight back, they fight to win, regardless of the odds or the cost. Sarah began coordinating defenses across human space while planning strikes against targets throughout the galaxy. The war was escalating beyond anything the current galactic powers had ever experienced, and she intended to make sure humanity emerged victorious. The Great Hunt had declared war on the wrong species. Now they were about to face the consequences of that mistake, delivered by ancient weapons in the hands of someone who embodied everything that made humanity dangerous: intelligence, adaptability, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. The galaxy would never be the same. But, then, again, that had always been humanity's specialty, changing everything they touched, whether the universe was ready for it or not. 2 years after the hunt that changed everything, Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the command center of Kepler 442b, watching as the last great hunt facility in known space was systematically dismantled by automated systems that had once belonged to a civilization lost to time. The war was over, and humanity had won more decisively than anyone could have imagined. The final battle had taken place in the galactic core, where the ancient enemies of the architects had made their last stand using weapons that could tear apart star systems. Sarah had met them there with the full power of the awakened defense network, supported by a coalition of species that had chosen to stand with humanity against tyranny that had oppressed the galaxy for millions of years. The battle had lasted 3 days and reshaped the local stellar geography. When it was over, the Great Hunt and their ancient allies were extinct, their technology captured or destroyed, and their threat to younger civilizations permanently ended. Sarah had become the most powerful individual in galactic history, commanding technology that made her the ultimate arbiter of conflicts between star-spanning civilizations. But victory had come with a price that was only now becoming apparent. Sarah looked at her reflection in the command center's displays and barely recognized the woman staring back. 2 years of interfacing with architect technology had changed her on a fundamental level. Her neural patterns had been gradually modified by the network systems, optimizing her cognitive abilities to handle the vast computational requirements of galactic-scale warfare. She could think faster than any baseline human, process information with machine-like efficiency, and make strategic decisions that accounted for variables across thousands of star systems simultaneously. The network had made her into the perfect operator for its systems, but, in doing so, it had made her into something that was no longer entirely human. The transformation hadn't gone unnoticed. Human colonial governments were beginning to express concerns about Sarah's increasing isolation from normal human society. Her communications with Earth had become formal and distant, more like diplomatic exchanges between different species than conversations between fellow humans. Sarah understood their fears, but she also understood the necessity of what had happened to her. The architect technology required an operator who could think beyond human limitations, someone who could make decisions that mere humans would find impossible to comprehend. The galaxy was too large and too dangerous for purely human perspectives to ensure humanity's survival. But that didn't make the isolation any easier to bear. Sarah had received word that Earth was sending a diplomatic mission to Kepler 442b, ostensibly to thank her for saving human civilization but actually to assess whether she still considered herself human. The irony wasn't lost on her: she had saved humanity from extinction, and now they were afraid of what she had become in the process. She activated the communication systems that connected her to the broader galactic community and reviewed the current status reports. 43 species had formally requested protection under the Architect Defense Network. 17 others were negotiating treaty arrangements that would provide security guarantees in exchange for technological assistance. The galaxy was more peaceful than it had been in millennia, but that peace was enforced by the threat of weapons that could annihilate entire civilizations. Sarah had become the galaxy's apex predator, the ultimate deterrent against aggression and expansion through conquest. But apex predators were solitary creatures, feared and respected but ultimately alone at the top of the food chain. The diplomatic mission from Earth arrived 3 days later, led by Admiral Elena Vasquez, who had been Sarah's roommate during their undergraduate years at the university. The reunion was awkward in ways that highlighted just how much Sarah had changed. "You look different," Elena said as they met in the facility's main conference room. "Not older, exactly. More intense. The network requires certain modifications to ensure optimal interface efficiency," Sarah replied, her tone more clinical than she had intended. "The changes are necessary for managing galactic-scale defensive operations." Elena's expression showed the kind of concern that Sarah had been expecting. "Sarah, do you still think of yourself as human?" The question struck at the heart of Sarah's growing isolation. She had retained her memories, her core personality, and her fundamental values. But the way she processed information and made decisions had changed so dramatically that she wasn't sure the distinction mattered anymore. "I'm still committed to human welfare and galactic peace," Sarah said finally. "Whether that makes me human in the traditional sense is probably irrelevant." "It's not irrelevant to the people who care about you," Elena replied. "Your family asks about you. Your colleagues want to know if you're ever coming home. The entire human species owes you a debt that can never be repaid, but we're also terrified that we've lost you in the process of being saved." Sarah felt something that might have been sadness, though it was filtered through cognitive processes that analyzed emotional responses for strategic implications. She had gained the power to protect humanity from any conceivable threat, but, in doing so, she had become something that humanity itself found alien and frightening. "The galaxy is a dangerous place," Sarah said, gesturing toward the displays that showed real-time intelligence from across human space. "Even with the Great Hunt eliminated, there are other threats emerging. Species that are testing our defenses, looking for weaknesses they can exploit. Ancient technologies awakening in response to the power signatures we've been generating. If I were to return to Earth, to resume a normal human life, who would operate the defense network?" "We could find someone else," Elena suggested, though her tone indicated she knew the answer wasn't that simple. "The network chose me specifically because I demonstrated the qualities necessary for this role," Sarah explained. "It's not a job that can be transferred to someone else without years of preparation and modification. And, even then, there's no guarantee that another operator would make the same choices I would." Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah's face for signs of the person she had once known. "What kind of choices?" Sarah activated the room's tactical displays, showing Elena the current galactic situation in real time. Dozens of potential conflicts were highlighted across the galaxy, situations where species were positioning for territorial expansion, resource competition, or ideological confrontations. Each required constant monitoring and occasional intervention to prevent escalation into warfare. "Yesterday, I prevented 3 different wars by demonstrating superior firepower in key strategic locations," Sarah said, pointing to specific incidents on the display. "Last week, I mediated a territorial dispute between the Centauri Alliance and the Vegan Republics by threatening to withdraw defensive support from both sides unless they reached a negotiated settlement. Tomorrow, I'll probably need to intervene in a trade conflict that could destabilize commerce across 6 star systems." Elena studied the displays with the analytical mind that had made her one of Earth's most successful military commanders. "You're not just defending humanity anymore. You're managing the entire galaxy." "Someone has to," Sarah replied. "The alternative is a return to the chaos that allowed organizations like the Great Hunt to operate with impunity. Species will expand through conquest, technology will be used to oppress rather than uplift, and, eventually, some ambitious empire will develop weapons capable of threatening even architect defenses. But, why does it have to be you?" Sarah smiled, and, for a moment, Elena caught a glimpse of the friend she had once known. "Because I'm the one who refuses to quit. That's what makes humans dangerous, Elena. We don't accept defeat, even when the odds are impossible. And now I have the tools to make that stubbornness effective on a galactic scale." Elena spent 3 more days on Kepler 442b, observing Sarah's operations and trying to understand what her friend had become. She watched as Sarah coordinated defensive responses across multiple star systems, mediated diplomatic crises that could have led to interstellar warfare, and made strategic decisions that affected the lives of trillions of sentient beings. On her final day, Elena asked the question that had been troubling her since her arrival. "Are you happy, Sarah?" Sarah considered the question with the same analytical precision she applied to galactic strategic planning. Happiness was an emotional state that had little relevance to her current existence. But satisfaction, purpose, and the knowledge that she was protecting everything she valued? Those were concepts that still resonated with whatever she had become. "I'm exactly where I need to be," Sarah said finally. "Doing exactly what needs to be done." Elena departed the next day, carrying with her a message for Earth's leadership and Sarah's family. The message was simple: Dr. Sarah Chen was still fighting for humanity, just on a scale that made her previous life seem small by comparison. She wasn't coming home, but she was ensuring that humanity would always have a home to return to. Months passed. Sarah continued her work, managing conflicts and deterring aggression across the galaxy while the defense network grew stronger and more sophisticated. New species made contact, seeking protection or alliance. Ancient technologies were discovered and either integrated into the network or destroyed as potential threats. And, slowly, Sarah began to understand that she wasn't alone. The architect technology had been designed to create operators who could think beyond the limitations of their original species, but it had also been designed to eventually create a new form of consciousness entirely. Sarah was becoming the first member of a new kind of being, one that thought in terms of galactic civilizations rather than individual worlds. But she was not the last. The network was identifying other candidates across multiple species, beings who demonstrated the intelligence, adaptability, and moral courage necessary to join her in protecting galactic civilization. In time, there would be others like her, each responsible for different aspects of maintaining peace and order across the stars. Sarah looked out at the galaxy that had become her responsibility and felt something that might have been contentment. She had started as prey, hunted by predators who saw her as nothing more than a target to be eliminated. But humans had never stayed prey for long, and Sarah Chen had proven that truth on the largest possible stage. She was no longer human in any traditional sense, but she was still fighting for human values, the right of all species to develop freely, the protection of the weak from the strong, and the absolute refusal to accept a universe where might makes right. The Great Hunt had sought to eliminate a threat to their established order. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous, a human who had transcended her original limitations while retaining the stubborn determination that made her species unique. Sarah Chen had become the galaxy's apex predator, and, under her protection, civilization would have the chance to grow, evolve, and reach heights that no single species could achieve alone. The universe was still a dangerous place, but it was no longer a place where the strong could prey upon the weak without consequence. The hunt was over. Humanity had won. And the galaxy would never be the same. In the end, the aliens had been right about one thing: humans were dangerous. They just hadn't understood that being dangerous wasn't always a threat to be eliminated. Sometimes, it was exactly what the universe needed to survive.